Welcome back, America. Ben Shapiro, outstanding book, How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps. It could not be more timely. So my question to you was reality versus ideology. So how are these soft Marxists, progressive, statists, these one-party rule cities, how are they doing when it comes to individual liberty and choice and equality and wealth creation, that magnificent paradise they keep talking about?
Well, they're doing horribly. I mean, the fact is that when the disintegrationists take over an area, it really isn't about building anything new. In fact, the failure is the goal. You actually want things to fail because any success is going to be attributed to the broader American system. And the broader American system is bad. So what you actually want is more unsuccess. You want people who aren't getting jobs. You want more inequality. And if more crime occurs, that's actually a good case to be made that the entire system is to blame. This is one of the beautiful things about being a utopian, living in somebody else's system. Anything that's bad that happens can then be blamed on the system at large. And that's exactly what you're seeing. This is why you see in some of the diversity training manuals. I mean, the National Museum of African American History and Culture put out a full-on display this week that suggested that whiteness was things like the scientific method, like hard work, like delayed gratification, basically saying anything that can make you achieve in the society is a white thing and you shouldn't engage in it. And if you do engage in it, you're part of the white supremacist system. So they're actively promoting failure. They're actively trying to teach all of the things that would make you fail in life and then teaching that as resistance to the system. So success is not a barometer for these folks. For disintegrationists, the goal is not actually building something new. The goal is really the disintegration. That's the feature, not the bug.
You make a very important point. So success is the enemy, achievement is the enemy, because you're in a constant state of rebellion, right? And if you don't have a constant state of rebellion, you don't have a reason to exist. I suppose that's the bottom line, isn't it?
That's exactly right. I mean, there was a New York Times columnist who recently compared America to a house that was built on shaky foundations and said, well, here we are trying to repaint and whitewash the house. Here we are trying to fix up the holes in the walls, but the foundations are shaky. The point there being that any attempt to fix anything in America, any solution, is actually a problem, right? The real solution is just rooting out the entire system. So failures by Democrats in inner cities, those are things that can be attributed to the broader American system. And we're trying our best, but we're still working within a corrupt and horrible system. And so we can never really overcome the endemic corruption and evil of the system in order to make lives better. And so failure actually becomes a point in favor of destroying a system that they themselves are fighting against.
And they destroy this system, which destroys neighborhoods, destroys education, destroys the economy. And then they blame it on the system. And in many respects, they are the system. Certainly since the New Deal, in many respects, they're the system. So you have cities run by people who are running against the system as they own and control the system. And isn't the way to do that, as an example, to use racism? But for racism, things would be swell. Isn't that so harmful to the individuals in the inner city? And so you have this opposition to school choice, whether it's charter schools or vouchers or parochial schools or whatever it is, and they get in bed, that is, with each other, whether they're elected Democrats or whether they're running the teachers' union. So there's a great contradiction here, isn't there?
There is no worse message to propagate to a child than the idea that is now promulgated in all the halls of power that if you are black in America, you cannot succeed. It does not matter what choices you make, you will not succeed because the system is stacked against you. You teach a child that, and you are damning that child to a life of difficulty and impoverishment and bad decision-making because you're literally teaching them that cause and effect do not exist for you. You live outside of that system. You're not in control of your own life. This actually makes a lot of white woke liberals feel really good about themselves. There's a particular kind of self-righteousness and arrogance that attaches here where the only people who matter are white woke liberals because black people in America, according to the white woke, they don't actually have agency in their own lives. The only people who have agency are the paternalistic white people who can save them by denouncing the system and building something new on the wreckage.
I want to ask you about the media, and particularly the New York Times. There's been a lot about the New York Times this past week with Barry Weiss and her remarkable letter from the inside, what she saw, and she was there for 3 years, how corrupt it is in every respect, intellectually and otherwise. The New York Times, though, has a history of this. The New York Times, as you know, was the mouthpiece for Stalin in 1932 and throughout the early Stalinist period through Walter Duranty. They lied about the slaughter of the Ukrainians. Less than a decade later, the New York Times was censoring the Holocaust at the request in part of the Franklin Roosevelt administration, but it pushed it to its back pages. So here we have two of the most horrific genocides in world history, and the New York Times was a propagandist for Stalin. and it was involved in censorship when it comes to the Holocaust, any other corporation in America would be viewed as a contemptible, failed corporation, utterly and completely unreliable. And here the New York Times is said to be the gold standard for the media. Isn't that the problem? It is the gold standard for the media.
I mean, that's exactly right. And what's even more amazing is that those were the good old days at the New York Times. I mean, right now, the staffers just run the New York Times. I mean, this is perfectly clear from Barry's letter, and full disclosure, I'm friends with Barry. The fact that the editors were allowing the staffers to attack the only fellow staffer who was willing to give a hearing to points of view that were outside of the wild leftism of the New York Times is pretty incredible. I mean, the New York Times basically handed over editorship to Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's the head of the 1619 Project, and she now rules the roost over there. And the 1619 Project is not a piece of journalism. It's a piece of pseudo-history that is designed to paint America in the worst possible light. Nicole Hannah-Jones, somebody recently suggested in a column, I believe it was in the New York Post, that the riots that have been happening across the country are the 1619 riots because they're tearing down statues of the founders. They're suggesting that Ulysses S. Grant is the bad guy. And Nicole Hannah-Jones tweeted back that she was proud of that, which kind of gives the game away. And the fact is that when the narrative trumps the facts, you're in Walter Duranty territory. Walter Duranty was the bad guy, but to the New York Times, listen, he still had his Pulitzer, and Nicole Hannah-Jones has her Pulitzer, and not much has changed when it comes to the narrative trumping the facts.
Now, as a matter of fact, if the New York Times and Nicole Hannah-Jones and the others were to apply their own standard to the New York Times, as Michael Goodwin pointed out in the New York Post this past week, it has a very strong history of racism and a strong history connection to slavery. At least part of the Sulzberger and Oakes family did. We'd have to burn down the New York Times building, wouldn't we, based on their own violent ideological consistency. So purity is a damn difficult thing. We'll be right back.